Well, everyone, we've been here before, and we've been here before quite recently. A game owned by Take-Two that is now no longer being made by the original development team that has seemingly had content pushed out way too early and is now getting a massive backlash from long-term fans. Just that this time, I'm not talking about Kerbal Space Program, I'm talking about Risk of Rain. This is a messy situation, and in fairness, it's one that's fundamentally pretty hard to get right, like picking up the baton from another dev team. Now though, the original devs have weighed in on the situation, and they've also been acquired by Valve, because yeah, it's this channel, come on, I gotta mention Valve. Now, I've got no sponsor today, but just a quick thing, a few seconds. Could you give the subscribe button a cheeky wee caress? And I say that because it really does help. It gives the algorithm a positive signal, and that means whenever somebody refreshes their homepage, it's more likely that YouTube shows them our content, and that helps me reinvest into our crew, and that helps us make the best damn content for you that we can as consistently as is possible. Okay, let's get into it then. So the latest DLC is called Seekers of the Storm, and it is currently the worst rated product of like Risk of Rain on Steam. And to be honest, that absolutely goddamn blows. Risk of Rain 1 is an absolutely lovely, beautiful, special game. Risk of Rain 2 is bloody fantastic, so it's sad that this happens. And this isn't one of those situations where there's a DLC that's got a negative review because the 100 people who are angry at it just happened to click through to the review page. Oh no, the DLC has got like 7,000 plus reviews. Now for the game itself, 41% of the 7,000 recent reviews are positive. Overall, the game is at 93% positive, which it absolutely does deserve. It's just this situation blows. Now, in terms of sales volume, Risk of Rain 2 overall has done amazingly well. It got 75,000 concurrents, which is a new peak for the game, and it actually went from being not even in the top 100 sellers in Steam all the way up to being rank 6. The question, though, is where's that revenue coming from? Because it's coming from Risk of Rain, we just don't know which bit. You see, base Risk of Rain is 67% off, and the other DLC, which is really, really good, well, that's also a third off. So revenue from the two of those could be a large part of it. And to be honest, all this selling well has just meant more eyeballs on a DLC that was clearly not ready for daylight. I'm going to read excerpts from Steam reviews that are broadly representative of the negative sentiment. The DLC and patch that came with it has broken the game in many ways, likely because the team working on the game just does not understand how the game works. On top of that, the only draw for veteran players is the returning survivor Chef, who they have completely massacred. So that's not a happy customer. Another review, this shouldn't have been released full stop. The music and the new zones are pretty good, but it came at the sacrifice of everything else to the point where the base game is massively affected too. And that's the problem. You don't just get a DLC in isolation. That DLC will come with an update to the game to support the DLC. If that update breaks things, you're screwed. And the final sampling of the reviews is pretty short. Oh my god, I'm going to cry. Not great, so let's break down what actually happened here. There's two parts to the story. Number one is the DLC itself, and one of the big problems was that Steam's regional pricing defaulted to much higher rates in some global regions than the previous expansion. And it absolutely did look like price gouging. It was ridiculous, but well, it has actually been reverted pretty much within a day, and people who bought at the original price have been recommended to refund and then repurchase the game so they get the correct pricing. So that's one drama that they definitely didn't need to have, but did have. Beyond that then, content-wise, there's a fair amount added. We've got 3 survivors, 5 stages, 3 more variants, 3 new monsters alongside a boss and 18 pickups, plus a whole lot of other things. Again, with a game like this, there are small details that make a big, big, big difference. Now, the recurring complaints are essentially saying that as a whole, right, the new content is not aligning with how a lot of players want to play the game or expect the new content to work. There are new items that feel like they've got a redundant design. There's problems where, as an example, you can't kill the final boss depending on what items you've got because of a bug. So it's a mixture of design things and also just performance stability bugs. Basically underwhelming even before the DLC specific bugs are considered. And then there's also then the problems that the latest patch brought to the rest of the player base who haven't bought the DLC, and that has been frame rate issues, textures either clipping or being missing, HUD problems, abilities not working, item UX breaking, and loads of other things. In a game like this that is so systemic, I mean, if you break a few things, it will just sort of impact everything. That's what we're seeing here. And the biggest and most prominent issue is the frame rate and other systems we're all just kind of tied up to the game's physics engine. Generically speaking, you do not want those things to be tied together, and that has, of course, meant that modders have had an opportunity to just show how incredible they are, but also tear their own hair out because they're looking at this and seeing basic misunderstandings that nobody should be making. And I know that sounds like a real brutal thing to say, But no, you don't tie things to frame rate. Like, unless you're doing some weird experimental game where the selling point of the game is it plays differently depending on the frame rate, like, you don't do that. Now, there are fixes coming. It's now a day since I recorded the rest of the video, and the good news is we've got an update. So there's an update from the developers, there's also a patch for the game, and I'm just going to read out their statement. We want to start off by mentioning how much we appreciate folks jumping in and giving Secrets of the Storm a swing. We've never had so many people playing Risk of Rain 2. We also hear you loud and clear. This DLC fell short of your expectations. That feedback is fair, and they basically say they want to explain what the plan is to people. The first thing is they said they're committed to making sure the DLC will be what people expect, so essentially saying they're going to stick around and fix it. They say they've already jumped in and knocked out solutions to loads of different bugs that people are reporting. I think the main highlight is basically they said that there was a bug in the way that builds were compiled that occasionally led to behaviors erroneously being tied to FPS. That is good to hear. They then go on to say they've addressed an issue where people were basically having items being picked up when not interacted with. Mithrix is then no longer almost invincible if he steals a player's warped echo. So there's that. There are loads of patch notes. They did say, though, that this is just the first step and there will be regular patches beyond this. They then also said that beyond the bugs, they're looking at the gameplay feedback. They say they want it to be the best possible version of itself, and that involves listening, and that right now, they do have to fix the bugs, but after the bugs and future patches, it's going to be about the design. And then they ended by basically just pointing people towards their patch notes. So that's that situation. I mean, obviously, there's no way it was going to be fixed within a day of me recording the original video. It's good to know that they're on the case, and this certainly is pretty rapid for an initial fix. But of course, there is much more work to do, and quite a bit more to this story, so let's continue because, oh man, Randy Pitchford, what's going on, mate? The thing is, right, developers are not just a bunch of cowboys who want to ruin our days. Usually they're, something is released, and it's not released by the developers. I mean, they may be the people who make the content that gets released, but look, we all know that they're not the people making the decisions here. Looking at this, how has such a beloved game tanked this goddamn hard? Why did this happen? Why was the backlash so rapid? What the hell's going on? Well, as you probably know, one of the main things is this is not being made by the same people who made Risk of Rain 2. And that's where we enter Gearbox. So for some background here, the original Risk of Rain was made by Hoppo Games. They then went and they made Risk of Rain 2. They also made the last expansion that came out, Survivors of the Void. And the thing with Hoppo is, I mean, look, straight bangers all the time. They're goddamn incredible. So Survivors of the Void set a pretty high bar. Now, in between Survivors of the Void and this expansion, things have changed because Hoppo Games sold the Risk of Rain IP to Gearbox in 2022, and Gearbox actually served as the publisher for Risk of Rain 2. Hoppo has actually now been dissolved, though, because basically, Valve just kind of gobbled them up. Who knows? I mean, they're clearly extremely capable game designers. Valve is obviously in a mood to actually make video games again these days. So I suppose much like grabbing the Firewatch developer, and I think the Firewatch people working on Alex, and Alex probably being the basis for Half-Life 3, Valve knows that they've got a lot of money, and the best way that they can make a Half-Life 3, as an example, that actually is worthy of Half-Life 3, which is like the highest of all bars that anybody could think of. Well, the way for them to do that is to find the best talent that exists in the industry, bar none. And that means seeking it out, which means situations like this. Also, there is just the problem of, look, sometimes you make a game, audience loves the game, you love making the game, but maybe you don't want to make that game for 15 years of your life. That could be half of your professional career, right? So yes, they did end up selling it. They sold it to their publisher and console port partner Gearbox, who were clearly very happy with this. They got an incredibly strong IP. Now, beyond the ongoing support, Gearbox's first usage of this was a mobile gacha game that was killed before it even released. I'm glad that didn't happen. Risk of Rain doesn't deserve for that. And you know, it is funny because I just mentioned Half-Life. Now we're talking about Gearbox. You do remember where Gearbox started. They were doing console ports and expansions for Half-Life 1 for Valve. So yeah, small world, it's all connected. Now, at this point, Gearbox was still under the Embracer Group. So absurd money-making bets absolutely they were the done thing of the day. Now, the second Gearbox standalone project was, of course, this DLC. And people were already skeptical at the idea of Gearbox taking over the reins. Fears have absolutely been proven proven right. Now, of course, much like a House of the Dragon fan, F5ing the George R.R. Martin blog and finding, oh, why has his response to Season 2 seemingly been deleted? A lot of people want to know what the original devs thought. Thankfully, they've obliged. So, Duncan Drummond, who is the co-founder of Hoppo, basically was sympathetic to all sides, reinforcing that, like, this sucks for the fans, but from his perspective, he says he knows that the dev team actually care about the game, and that they will feel the same way. They'll understand that it sucks for the fans, and they will have wanted the best. Now, for a lot of people, and especially that first Steam reviewer, where basically the Steam reviewer that I quoted said, the devs don't really know what they're doing. That's where I actually go to Jeffrey Hunt. So Jeffrey Hunt was a Hoppo programmer. He spoke to PC Games N, and here's a direct quote from him. I think that the team working on the DLC did the best they could with what time and resources they were given, which isn't a stretch to guess wasn't enough. I remember the team at Gearbox we worked with on the Survivors of the Void DLC was doing really well, particularly on the new stages. So that's a funny little thing then. He's basically saying, well, we've worked with people who almost certainly worked in the new DLC, and that went great. So then you think, what could have changed things? Probably Gearbox having a bit more power. And that is when we get to talk about everybody's great friend and just absolute pillar, legend, pure unit of the industry, Randy Pitchford, Master of Magic, who basically framed his role in the DLC in these terms. Quote, all glory goes to the dev team. If you have any problems, please blame me. I'm always happy to be the pincushion and ultimately responsible and accountable anyways. And as people say, whenever you see something in, a quote or a bit of writing in a TV show and you think, that's just the writer's thinly disguised fetish. At this stage, Randy, boy howdy mate, there's a lot of pincushioning going on. Things have been rumbling. Because, of course, also the Borderlands movie was not necessarily the biggest success in the universe, to put it mildly. But there's been trailers and stuff for Borderlands 4, and I'm sure they're hoping that will somewhat make up for things. Now, later, Pitchford said that even the Beatles had a 25% hit rate, so it's not going to stop him or the company from trying stuff. And there is some truth to that. You can't have absolutely everything be a banger. But in this case, did the Beatles have bad albums because they were rushed out? I don't know enough about the Beatles to say, but in this case, it really does seem like this shouldn't have been released, which does mean, yeah, it's pincushion time. That's Randy's response. Gearbox proper had a response on Steam, basically cataloging the bugs that they were tracking after 3 days. That includes the physics bug, by the way, which of course is a very high priority one. Now, from the part of the devs, they are simply just trying to fix the game. Yeah, unsurprisingly, they certainly will have a lot of work to do. Hopefully, things will be better. One issue, though, is design decisions. It could be the case that some of those design decisions are maybe ruined by bugs. It could be that some of them are ruined by balance because, as they say, the dose makes the poison. You can have a brilliant design, but I think my modification of that is the tuning makes the design, right? But it just gets us to the broader problem of how do you follow greatness? How the hell do you do that? Because it was always going to be tough to follow Hoppo. They are incredible. And the thing is, they're young as well. Like, oh man, they're an impressive bunch. So much so that Valve headhunted them. That's going to be hard. Risk of Rain 2 was a massive gameplay departure from the original game. Risk of Rain 1 was a side-scroll. It was very different. I absolutely love it. But for them to be able to translate that formula into 3D and still have that resonate, very few in our industry can actually accomplish that. And that is testament to their quality. And as much as Half-Life Opposing Force is a real banger, that was, over 20 years ago. People rather think of Aliens, Colonial Marines, and Duke Nukem Forever when they think about Gearbox, or just Borderlands and Borderlands and Borderlands and more Borderlands and, the Borderlands farm forever. And it probably also didn't help that the console ports of Risk of Rain were seen as being a little bit inferior. Now, technical knowledge is something that can be improved on, providing Gearbox and Take-Two are not rushing out products to just hit arbitrary targets, which it certainly looks like they did here. The bigger problem, though, is how the hell do you take over that creatively? And this is something we've seen everywhere. I like Halo. I'm in pain. The Coalition with Gears of War. Of course, Metal Gear Survive. Notably not directed by Hideo Kojima. And so it's interesting because based on a lot of Steam reviews, there's not a lot of faith in the development team. But when you actually look at what the people who made Risk of Rain, what they're saying publicly, they are trying to champion the potential of these new developers. And I suppose the new development team, they worked with Hoppo on the prior DLC. And while the programmer didn't outright say, literally what the problem is, and he sort of said it in the generic case, well, that's an individual who did work on Risk of Rain things with Gearbox, and maybe knows how Gearbox are kind of functioning. So maybe even though he said, oh, generally in a time like this, it's because the dev team wasn't given the time and the money. Maybe the wink wink nudge nudge is that they definitely weren't given the time and the money. But even with that, mind melding with another designer is an extremely hard thing to do, especially if you also have got your own takes on things. And this is always hard because whenever something goes wrong with a game, we don't always get the chance to have a course correction. And I say that even though this is not exactly handing over the baton, because speaking to fans at PAX West just after the release of the DLC, the design lead Bruno Fontanetti was pretty keen to reinforce that the team does actually have a plan for the future with this game. So he's saying that it's very clear that they stumbled out of the gate with this first attempt. I think one of the big issues here is you do not have clarity on a team's design whenever, the frame rate and the physics are all messed up with each other and there's loads of bugs and just, lots and lots of problems. Now, we do at least know from Hoppo's people that this new team was doing a really good job when it came to the zones and the environments. And that is something that people have said is actually pretty good in this new DLC. Maybe it could be just some of those parts of the design they're a little bit less confident in. It's hard to say, but I am glad to hear that they've got a plan, and I hope that they're going to be able to stick with this. I cannot imagine that the dev team for a game of this scale is going to be humongous, and that means they're probably not going to have a massive burn rate. Look, there's a whole bunch of things that should mean. One of them is, they're not costing you that much money. Just delay the bloody thing by 6 months, Gearbox. Come on. The weird thing is, these publishers do mock reviews, right? They do mock reviews, even if they don't know literally every bug and every problem in a perfectly itemized list. They'll know via mock reviews if it's basically not that playable. Maybe they skipped mock reviews, I don't really know, but there's no way that this was basically not known at all levels of the chain involved. And because of that, to you and me, this seems like absolute goddamn insanity and madness. From Gearbox's perspective, though, well, what are they driven by? Because you see, one of the things that ends up messing around with a problem like this is senior management. I remember watching a television show. I'd highly recommend it. It's got J.K. Simmons and J.K. Simmons. It's called Counterpart. And in a part of that, there's basically, imagine Cold War spy stuff. You got the people who are upstairs, upper management. And they're, shrouded in mystery, not really talked about, mysterious. And it's almost a bit like that. You have some of the key decision makers who are seeing product, thinking about quarters, thinking about their own sort of KPIs and things. They'll be the people making the big decisions. The problem is, they're making those calls, but they are furthest away from the front line. And look, I know whether you're watching videos or you're even somebody on my team, yeah, I just go to military analogies all the time. I'm fascinated by military history. One of the things that has led to, I suppose you could say, the non-Soviet forces tending to do a lot better is more decentralized decision-making, right? Where people understand the big mission they've got to accomplish, but the actual execution of the details of that mission, well, funny enough, the person who's going to do a better job of that is probably the person who's closer to actually doing the damn thing. And I think with companies, when we get too many layers of management, we end up with problems like that, where a bunch of people are just rubber stamping something because they are getting pressure from above. And look, I'm not going to break any sort of confidence, but this is something that I've seen, not in a me doing this channel way and analyzing the news. I've seen in a personal way, I've seen happen from the sidelines. And, you look at it and I just think to myself, man, this is exactly the sort of thing that I end up talking about every week in the channel. And here I am seeing it happen. Why has it got to be like this? Why? It's quite frustrating. And often where it's the worst is that for the people who make this decision, yeah, they have a bit of stress and it blows for them. But it's just one of the many things they're managing. For the people who spent years of their life, working, well, they're the people who actually suffer the most, the developers. I know that there's probably, you could say, objectively more suffering at scale because maybe if 100,000 people buy something and it all, it sucks just a little bit for all of them, that is still a hell of a lot of misery. But just think a second for the dev team, the amount of time that they will have spent on this, and then how this has happened, and how they have probably seen this iceberg coming. This is not like a Titanic situation. This is something where everyone sees the iceberg coming, but the captain thinks that the Titanic is an icebreaker and they can just sail through it. And that's what game release like this is and shouldn't be. So that's the crack there. It blows to the new dev team. I honestly wish you the best of luck. I hope that you get back to your plan after this stuff is fixed up. and at least that this had the potential, even with so much going against it, to get up to rank 6 in Steam. I hope that at least gives the higher-ups confidence that Risk of Rain is gold and that it must be protected. That's all I've got to say in the matter. Let me know what you think. Thank you for hanging out with me, and if you want to support, support me, support the team, get Loading Screen, our newsletter every single day, as well as early access to our content and all that good stuff, hit up bellular.games. That's our home on the internet. All right, have an awesome day. See you next time.